Hello and welcome to Pillowcase Making 101. You're going to need 28 inches minimum for the body of the pillowcase. I usually buy 1 yard, so I have a little bit of leeway. Straighten one edge of the fabric. You don't need to straighten both edges. The second edge will be straightened at the end of the pillowcase. If you'd like a decorative strip on your pillowcase, you'll need a 3-inch strip. For the border of the pillowcase, you'll need to cut an 11-inch strip. I usually purchase 1/3 yard. Let's take a look at the inside of a pillowcase so you have some idea of how it's made. This is the bottom seam. There's a 1/2 inch seam allowance. The edge is finished with a zigzag, or you can use a serger as well. The side seam is what's called a French seam. There's no loose frayed edges on this seam. My grandma Arlene taught me how to make that kind of a seam. The top border, this is the inside. You as well don't see any loose seams there. The outside of the pillowcase then is where you see your decorative strip. It is a piece that is folded in half and it's just sewn on this side. This is a wonderful project to make with a friend. My friend Molly and I made matching pillowcases one afternoon. It's just a great way to make a memory. The first thing that you do is you take your decorative piece, fold it in half, and iron it. Then you take your pillowcase body. I don't cut the selvages off. That is something that will be done at the very end. You lay your decorative piece on the edge here, lining it up. Then you take your 11-inch strip of border fabric, place it face down on the edge, line it up. And to make it easy, go ahead and throw a few pins in there. After you have the pieces all pinned together, we're going to go to the sewing machine and sew a seam 1/4 inch in. So this is going to be, there's going to be 2 seams here, so your first one is 1/4 inch in. Alright, we've sewn our 1/4 inch seam here. We're going to take it and flip it over so the wrong side of the body is what we see. Then with the body, we're gonna roll it up, fold it up, however I like to fold it, and then come back and then kind of roll it, but not all the way to the edge. I like to leave 2 inches or so up here. This is the rest of my border. Wrong side of fabric, right side of fabric. I'm going to take this and bring it over. Line it up on the edges to make sure it's going to lay straight. And then go ahead and pin these layers all together. Once you have them pinned together, we're going to come back and we're going to sew a 1/2 inch seam. So the 1/2 inch seam is going to be farther than our first seam, and it'll make it look like a tube. Okay, so we have our next seam sewn on there. So on this side you see 2, on this side you see 1. We rolled this up and left it down 2 inches so it would not get caught in the seam when we sewed it up there. If you'd like to finish off this edge, you can with a serger or zigzag. I really don't feel it's necessary. It's going to be put inside. You won't see it at all, and pillowcases don't get just a ton of stretchy use. So next thing that you're going to do is you're going to grab the inside and pull it out. And this, I think, is one of the funnest things. There we go. This is the front of it, of course. And then the back. It's a nice finished edge right here. And then the front is this decorative piece. The decorative piece is going to automatically go towards the body of the pillow because the seam is up here, and so it's just a natural position for it. What you're going to do next is iron it. Handy dandy ironing board from Mom. What I like to do is first go to the back and just super lightly push this direction. If you press too hard, it'll go through and iron the front in a way that you don't want it to. Then you're going to come to the front. Whoops, sorry about that. And press it up. At the same time, you're also going to press this top seam, or not seam, but the top fold at the top of the pillowcase. And there we go. I'll finish that and be right back. The next step is to square up both of our sides and remove the selvage. So I have it folded in half and the sides lined up. And then I'm using this top edge to square it up. Alright, then on the other side you'll see that it's even more. This is where why we squared up at the end. It's just it's a lot easier just to cut off anything extra. So now my other side was lined up, and so to make your pillowcase square, cut off anything extra on this side then. What we're going to do next is called a French seam. We're going to take the fabric and put it wrong sides together. And that is just the opposite of what we almost always do. So what we're going to do is take the wrong sides together. And the only spots that I line up here and is this right here. This is the part that people will notice if it's off. So I throw a pin in here, and then a pin up here at the top. And then I'm going to go and sew a 1/2 inch seam all along this edge here. Be right back. Okay, we've sewed the wrong sides together with a 1/4 inch seam. We're going to iron it to set your seam. And this seam here will get ironed 3 different ways. So the first one is setting our seam. The second one, and I like to do it on the other side of the fabric, is to iron it open. And when you iron it open, put your seam one direction or the other, and then iron it continuously that direction. So you're going to want to feel it with your fingers to push it down to that one side. And if it's not in the right direction, just put your hand on the inside and kind of put it where you want it. Also be careful not to iron this fold over here because you don't want a funny crease in your pillowcase. Next, you're going to take it and right on that seam there, you're going to fold it and try to be fairly accurate. And sometimes using your fingers to work it back and forth will get that seam so the seam is right on the edge. Give it one more good pressing. What we're going to do now is make another seam. And I like to make it a 1/2 inch in. So what we're doing is when we make it a 1/2 inch in, our first seam is a 1/4 inch. Don't forget to clip your threads. But then when we make our 1/2 inch seam in, it's going to hide that first seam, and so you won't see it at all. If you get your 1/2 inch seam done and you turn it this way and you can see a little bit of it, because that does happen, not a big deal. Come back over here and sew just a little bit farther out and continue doing that, just, you know, just easing it over until you get that whole seam hidden. All right, have that seam done. I'm going to do a quick pressing seam set, iron. Then I'm going to flip it over, and I like to press this seam open. It just helps it to look better at the end. And so the same concept, it's generally best if you can just iron it one direction. And so when you're ironing it, if you see any other of the first seam sticking out, then you know to go back to your sewing machine and make your seam a little bit wider. All right, we're at the bottom now. So, as you can tell, the bottom is not square, it's not finished. What we do is we grab the pillow that we're going to be using and actually fit it to the size of the pillow. Some pillows seem to be a bit longer. You know, there's of course different sizes of pillows that you can get. Okay. What my goal generally is when I lay the pillow down, the pillowcase covers the end of the pillow. So I want it a little bit farther. And I'd rather have it a bit more than a bit less on this side. Now some people also like to see more of this sticking up, but all right. So then I come to the other end and make a judgment call of about where it would be for a seam. And I just do a general marking of it. Take the pillow back out. All right. My pin is right there, and so like I said, every pillow is different. It's up to you. From the border to here on this pillow I have 24. So another pillowcase I made it 28. That included the seam allowance. So I want to make sure I add my seam allowance in, and actually it's closer to 25. So I'll probably cut it 26 here, and then what I'll do is I'll flip it and sew the bottom edge and finish the bottom edge, and the pillowcase will be done. Once I got it all straightened out and double checked it, I ended up cutting it at 27. Now I'm going to turn it inside out again, fold it so it's right on this here seam, and when I start to sew, I always start on the seam side. And the reason that you do that is if you start on the side that has the fold, every once in a while it can get off. Well, then when it gets off, it makes it look funny on the side of the seam. So always start sewing on the side of your seam, and I'll make a 1/2 inch seam across, and then I'll finish this edge with either zigzag or the serger, trim all my threads, give it a final pressing, and it's good to go. A couple more tips for you. Backstitching, the general rule is if it's going to get cut off or another seam is going to go across it, you don't need to backstitch. On this pillowcase, this top corner is the place that you're going to really make sure you want to backstitch this one. Also, I do the bottom 2 corners. Do not forget to clip your threads. You don't want threads hanging out anywhere. It can be the difference between a blue and a purple ribbon. If you're making flannel, you might want to consider taking out the decorative piece. In this seam right here, it gets really bulky, and some machines are going to have a hard time sewing through it. It still looks nice without having that decorative stitch, so that is something there to consider. Another thing to consider is making your decorative stitch a different size. You know, this is your pillowcase. You can make it however you'd like. On this pillowcase here, since it is so long, on this side seam, I stitched just from here to here to help hold it into place. Now, yes, I probably should have changed my thread, but another option is just take a Sharpie marker and go right along this edge there. And that's why I always use a lighter one versus darker. And there you have it. Maybe take a little bit of black right up here at the top. And that thread then just disappears into the fabric. Also, when you are doing your seams, you know, I said the 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch, you know, the size of the seam isn't super important. Pillowcases are super forgiving, but what is important is that your seams are all straight. So don't worry so much about the size, just make it consistent for the whole pillowcase. I know earlier I said that seams don't necessarily need to be reinforced. When I was making this pillowcase, I realized that it would probably be used for pillow fights. So if you are thinking of pillow fights at all with your pillowcase, yes, please reinforce all the seams. And just like that, you're done with your pillowcase. Enjoy a good night's sleep.